saw a hand up.
No, it's me trying to find the participants window. There we go. Okay. Okay, so recording has started. Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the Public Records Advisory Council Legislative Subcommittee January 7th meeting. This meeting, we have a couple items of business today. I'm just going to read through the agenda for anyone who doesn't have access to it by through the virtual meeting that we're doing. We will, first item of business is to approve the agenda. We have, if there's any updates on information about the document sharing we're using, the system we're using, which was communicated to all the subcommittee members via email over the last couple of weeks. If there's any questions about that, those are the documents we're trying to use to help schedule our hearings and stuff in the months going forward. As you all heard in your email, the members of the subcommittee, that the state file sharing system is not effective for what we're trying to do. So we are sharing a Google Doc for that. We have the request to LPRO for research related to other states' records fees and costs. So we're going to try to finalize that today. And we'll have availability for public comment on that. And then hopefully we'll wrap all that up in about 10 minutes if possible. And we'd like to get into any public testimony about the cost of records. If anyone's here to testify about that, we do have some written testimony. And depending on how long that takes, we may, and the availability of members to stay on this today in the period that we've scheduled, we may have a short discussion about what we've heard so far and what is standing out, but we'll see how things go today. So any questions about the agenda, or could I get a motion to approve that?
So moved.
And a second.
This is Michael. I'll be second.
Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, so that's approved. Thank you. Oh no, I mean, let's all vote. All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye, or yeah, please say aye. Unmute and say aye.
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 Okay, fantastic. Thank you all very much. Does anybody have questions about the documents that I shared and the communications system I outlined for trying to schedule witnesses and topics for the meetings that we have on the calendar, for this research phase of our inquiry into costs? Do we have questions about those? I've only had a couple requests for the Google Doc, but I think most of you should have access granted.
Emily, this is Current Power.
Yeah.
Our internet has not, my email access has not been working for legislative email for the last 2 days.
Oh.
Can you quickly just give me some quick highlights around the timing?
Yeah, so we have on the calendar to meet every 3 weeks. And we have the document I'm mostly there's 2 documents I'm referring to that have been shared out. One is a list of issues and questions, and then one is actually basically a calendar in a Google Doc where if people to try to take ownership over a meeting and set up a panel of witnesses on a certain subject related to costs. For example, in December, the one we heard right in the middle of December from members of the media. And I know Steve, for example, is working on one that would bring in people who are experts in FOIA and public records costs at the national level. So the schedule, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Rep. Powers, is that we would be doing those gathering research over the next several months, and probably around in April, May, start discussing some like what we've learned and how that might translate into legislative language. Have I got your question answered?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's hugely helpful. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Steve, yeah.
Do you want us to go ahead and write in? Should we just go ahead and things in that calendar ourselves, or do you want to? Look, you don't need us to run it by you first.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that any member of the subcommittee has equal wisdom in figuring out what guests would be appropriate, and I certainly appreciate just taking on some of this work. But I don't think it needs to be. I mean, the only thing I would say is dates, right? If there's a conflict, if two members are going for the same date, that could be a potential conflict. So if you get a date nailed down, you might just want to flag me so I can communicate it with the rest of the subcommittees. Like, I really am looking at, February 14th. I think that one's going to come together. Can we kind of put a hold on that? That type of communication, I'm sure, would be helpful. Did that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, and I don't know if this is appropriate as part of the agenda, but I did want to ask at some point, I'm interested in the subcommittee's opinion on another group of witnesses that could be interesting. I've been doing some research on Kentucky and Oklahoma, which both have provisions in law that are similar to FOIA's in terms of treatment of commercial requests, definitely for purposes of cost. And I know that Todd and others have talked. Well, we're obviously looking at FOIA as a potential model. So I wonder whether there's interest in having. I've communicated with a couple of people from both of those states, and I'm wondering if there's interest in that and what people think the timing should be for that, whether it's premature to be getting that far down the road, where I should look to, later maybe in the spring, having them in. We'd welcome your thoughts. If now is the right time to talk about this. If not, we can talk about it.
So just to paraphrase the question to make sure I'm understanding it right, it's like a double question. One, what's the interest level in hearing from states, these two states in particular, ones you found that have taken some of the federal provisions and are employing those at the state level? And then the second question, I think, was when would be the right time to hear those, if I understood you right?
Yeah, pretty exactly. Yeah, and they actually adopted these provisions independently, really not copying the federal FOIA, but just sort of organically for their own reasons.
Okay, I have a question about that. I'd like to just take a quick round robin of the committee members who are here on the interest thing, and anybody who wants to weigh in on the schedule. I have a question for you, and then I'll comment on both of those things. My question is, do you think, Steve, that there's enough people like to weigh in at the federal level that we shouldn't combine those two panels necessarily? I mean, they are very different beasts, state law and federal law.
I think they make sense as separate panels. I mean, I'm thinking we're going to get at least 2, possibly 3 panelists on FOIA, and we could probably get 2 or 3 on the state stuff.
Okay. And then I'd like to do a round robin if we can. My inclination would be that sounds like useful people to hear from. And as far as timing goes, I don't know that. For me, I'm not sure if it would make that much of a difference when we hear from them, because I think the questions we had some questions, about drafting laws specifically. That information, even if we got it in February, we could certainly reference and make useful to ourselves when we're trying to draft our own language in May. So that's my take. Could we just have a quick round robin on how people feel? Todd, what do you think about those hearing from that type of guest, hearing from that type of witness?
Yeah, Steve, if we're asking LPRO to do this sort of state-by-state analysis for us so we could see whose models we're interested in and might want to work with. But if you've already identified these two of being of particular interest, why wait and ask them to come? And really any date that works. I'm trying to set up the state and local panel for March 11th, but if you need that date, I'm happy to share it. So it's no problem.
I wonder though, this is Michael Crone. I wonder though if we put that later on the schedule, do we have any sense of timing when LPRO will be back to us? Like we might there might be other states that it makes sense to hear from at the same time.
Melissa Leone is here, and I think we had discussed that it was likely to be able to LPRO to be back in like May or so. But Melissa, would you mind joining the conversation? And I know you don't have the formal request yet, but and kind of reminding us of what you think the realistic timing would be.
So realistically, LPRO, which would probably be Leslie Porter and I, won't be able to start until after session. So middle of March to give us a little time to recuperate, and thinking, depending on the extent of it, a couple of months is probably a realistic time frame.
Okay, so end of May.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Does that affect your comment, Michael Crone?
I don't know. I really think it's something more for Steve to think about, since he's offering to put this together.
Okay. Mark, do you have a comment about the value of hearing from Kentucky, Oklahoma, and if anything on timing?
Yeah, sorry. I haven't given it much thought, honestly. Forgive me, distracted with family issues. So I'm here to be helpful where I can. At this very moment on this question, I'm not terribly helpful, so sorry.
That's okay. We're gonna get to the LPRO letter in just a sec, where we would be great to have you stick around for the quorum to approve it if that's possible, and really appreciate you being here. And who else is here? Who's on the committee? I'm sorry, I'm looking at the list, but some of the people are phone numbers. That's it, right? Todd, Steve, Emily, Mark, and Michael. 5, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. Sounds like Steve, that I'd say press ahead, and, bearing LPRO in mind.
Yeah, I agree with Michael. I think the optimal would be to know the entire landscape before we start scheduling people, but maybe I will go ahead and try and get these two indoor, just because of the timing, and hope that we have time for additional states after LPRO completes review.
I mean, I think that makes sense, just because, yeah, of the timing, because we will want to, we'll be heading into summer basically at that point. So, okay, thank you. So just anything else? Anybody else have questions about the communications and the, working efforts to get more testimony? Okay, feel free anytime to reach out on email if you have questions. So, all right.
Are we still talking? Sorry, Emily. Are we still talking about the use of Google Docs? Because I mean, I think I'm pretty comfortable with that. The only thing I would say is, when we have a version that we're actually using to schedule a meeting, that probably becomes a public record, and maybe just figuring out a way. I mean, it is going to be a public record accessible to the public, but at that point, I think it would become something we also need to retain, and just getting it to probably to Todd at the point where it's final is a good idea, so he can just keep a copy of it.
Okay, that's fine. It is not a question now about using Google Docs. It was a decision that I made that that's the only really viable way to have any kind of shared working document. So
yeah,
so that's not a question anymore, but understood. And Google Docs, of course, retains copies of every iteration, which can be helpful if we need to go back and make iterations. But as soon as any scheduling is done, yeah, that would flip over to become an agenda item. I mean, a meeting announcement.
Right.
So,
perfect.
yeah, thank you. Okay. Anything else on that topic of communication and shared documents? Okay, we're going to move on to review, amend, and hopefully approve the request to LPRO. So I drafted a letter this meeting, which I had failed to do by the previous meeting, and sent it all to one-way communication to members of the subcommittee. One person got back with some comments. Do people have that in front of them, that letter? Is that something that you're looking at now? Because that's the or should I share my screen? Let me just see if I can share my screen. Here we go. Yep. What is important here is, let's see. Sorry, I use Zoom a whole lot more than I use the meeting. So Todd, I might need some help here, but do I do the share tray? Open it, share my desktop or window. Then do I get a choice? I do. Okay. Share. Okay, can people see a Google document on the screen, which is called Draft LPRO Request?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay, so this is, I will try to make it bigger so you can see more of it. And anybody who's on the subcommittee, you should have this link in your email if you want to look directly at it or jump into it. But the top of it is, this is a request that will go through Senator Thatcher. So it's just a general thanks and statement of what we're trying to do. The important thing here is the research request. And as you can see, it bullet points out things by certain categories and asks a couple more specific questions after that. And then at the end is just some helpful resources. So the real bulk of what we're asking and what we'd like to finalize is, I will leave the screen on this, between research request -LPRO in bold down to in performing this research, helpful resources may include. So I do have, I have shared this with, like I said, the subcommittee staff and subcommittee staff, that's an enduring world, the subcommittee members and Melissa at LPRO. And I did get one comment back from one person on the subcommittee. So I'm just to bring up those comments first. These are from Mark, and so Mark, please chime in if you'd like. But you had mentioned that under waivers, you'd like to know whether individual states make an explicit accommodation for members of the media, whether that's a fee reduction or a waiver, and if states do that, how do they define the term media? So my intent is just to add that, and as I'm typing that into this draft, if members of the subcommittee have any other comments either about that or anything else you see in here that you'd like to amend or delete, I'd like to hear those comments first, and then we'll hear from LPRO, and then if any members of the public have some comments, we can love to hear those as well. So I'm going to type Mark's request in, and please feel free to jump in, subcommittee members.
I have a small comment, Emily.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's more of a nitpick, or just a small edit, but it says for the research request, it's among the 50 states in DC, but we're not asking them to outline Oregon's law.
Oh, right.
So to avoid confusion or extra work, we should probably just say among the other 49 states or among all states except Oregon and DC.
There we go. Thank you.
Sure.
This is Kim. I'm jumping in real quick. I'm sitting in an airport. They're going to start blasting an announcement any second. But under fees, I would just say any other fee not considered above. Like maybe there's some other thing we had never thought of that's not listed or delineated in these bullets.
Fantastic. Anything else from folks? Okay.
Sorry, Emily. I was just noticing number 2. It says, "What are patterns (parentheses buckets groups of public records costs?" Do you mean with that patterns of how public records costs are handled in law? We're not talking about the costs themselves, right?
Yeah, this was a very clumsy attempt to put together a question that reflected how the LPRO folks had characterized what they might be able to do when we spoke last, which was, rather than present Arkansas does this and, Mississippi does this, kind of large categories of approaches that states take. And I did mean, in law. So does that get at what you were asking about, Steve? I'm not sure if this question makes any more sense by adding the word law.
Well, patterns to how the 50 states and the District of Columbia approach public records costs.
Okay. It wouldn't be the 50 states anymore. Okay, so what are patterns in how
I mean, I think you're right. They know what it means already, since they're the ones who proposed it. But.
Well, that was my clumsy interpretation. Okay. Anything else from subcommittee members on this? And then I wanted
one other thought. This is Kim. I don't know if it's captured under fees, but I know that sometimes AG fees are assessed based on the size of an agency, or the administrative services are assessed per agency. Would they? I wonder if there's any sort of scheme like that where they just assess a fee and it goes into a big pool. I don't know. When it comes to the public records.
You mean fees that are assessed by each agency per each request, but the fee actually goes to some kind of central?
Well, it's assessed to the actual agency that would have the records. I don't know. I'm just thinking there are situations where fees are assessed. I'm sorry about the background noise. The fees are assessed based, just for general things like an AG or administrative services. They're assessed by the size of the agency, pretty much. I don't know if this would even transfer, but I wonder if that is something that any other state does.
So would the question be something like, are fees built in based on the size of the agency, or am I capturing that right?
Maybe Mark would have a better way of phrasing that, but it's something along the line where I guess just ask the question, are there any other ways of paying for public records that are, especially given a waiver? I mean, there has to be a cost somewhere, right? Who eats that cost? And how is that assessed by the agencies? I don't know. Is there some other sort of method that states might use that are not covered
by fees
here?
Are there other ways for public records costs besides fees? How else do states cover costs that aren't covered by fees?
Something like that, because I think that some agencies would get dinged a lot more than others as far as public records requests and the costs associated with them, especially if there's a waiver. How are those paid for ultimately?
Okay.
Senator Mark Landauer, are you asking the question of, is there a different way to pay for the production of public records?
Yes, that's it. You nailed it. Thank you. I know if I threw you a lifeline, you'd catch it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's excellent. And Mark, while we've got you, the two pieces I added from your email about the explicit accommodation for members, did I capture those correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I just go into this whole discussion with the belief, and I think I've said it before, it's sort of my belief that if a true member of the media is making a request, it's my assumption that there is, I believe that there should be an assumption that there is a public interest involved. I may be different than some of my colleagues, but that's just how I sort of view this issue. And so I'm just interested in whether or not other states have a different type of mousetrap, if you will, and we should be aware of those mousetraps, because one thing that struck me during the last meeting, and I thought it was captured very well, was the individual who made the case that reporters shouldn't have to crowdsource for the production of public records. And that stuck, and that sticks with me and my head. And so I'm looking for a different mousetrap. If there are any out there, I think we should be aware of them. That's really what I was trying to capture there, Emily.
Okay. Well, when you were speaking, you just mentioned the assumption that if it's in the media, it's in the public interest. And so clearly getting at a definition of media would start to do that. Are you also interested in whether other states use the public interest like we do? Undefined, sort of undefined.
That's a really good question, Emily. And I think it is something that we need to look into perhaps a little bit. And I guess the question that we should be posing is, if there is a public interest in the records being requested, how do the individual states treat that request differently than, say, a run-of-the-mill request? I don't know if I'm articulating that terribly concisely. I apologize, but I think that there is something to that and worthy of additional information. And I guess that's sort of the point, complementary point to my question about how is the media treated in different states. Mm-hmm. I think that the issue of what is in the public interest and how are those records treated by those states perhaps differently than, say, a public record request made by an individual on a very specific topic that really has really not necessarily a public interest involved, per se.
Okay, I've captured this in two questions, each with a sub question. Do states make any explicit accommodation for members of the media, whether a reduction or a waiver? If so, how do they define media? Do states mention in the public interest? And if so, how do they treat waiver requests based on that? How do
or cost waiver or costs, right?
Waivers or costs. Waiver requests or costs based on that. And if so, how do other states define the public interest, if at all?
Great, I like that. Thank you.
Okay. And for anyone worried about my grammar and spelling, I am going to ask Todd to give this a once over for for all that before we actually send it to Senator Thatcher. Okay. Any other comments before I ask Melissa from LPRO to give some feedback?
Yes, I have a comment. About number 3, is it possible to determine, are any recognized as particularly successful in meeting the goals of open government, transparency, and equity? Well, one, I think we should fix the phrasing if we're going to keep it, but also I wonder if this is too subjective when we're asking for factual research. Isn't this something more of a conclusion we need to draw in terms of what we think it would mean for Oregon? Or Alternatively, I think it could mean a lot more work for LPRO. Like, are they supposed to be looking up court decisions, that state's version of AG orders? Like, how do you determine realistically in a reasonable amount of time while researching this in sort of like a black and white sort of way if these schemes are successful within that state?
It's a great question, and I'm sure Melissa can weigh in on that. I think one thing we should consider is, we're going to get a lot of great research back. We're going to have a much better sense of how other states approach it. But how are we going to understand like what works, for the goals that we're all after? Or like, so maybe this data request to LPRO is not the appropriate place to think about this. Let me, if I can, bring Melissa in here to get a sense of that. Like, does this feel too subjective to what you're able to do? Melissa, would you mind joining the conversation?
Sure. That's a really good point, and we had not flagged that one. But thinking about it now, I don't think I'd probably look at court cases. I'd probably look for either some kind of legislative history or media coverage around the implementation of a certain state's law, to look if there were some sort of record as folks feeling that was a workable or a problematic system, for example. I mean, there's sort of both things, but I think you're right. That is beyond that kind of cursory look to see if there's some evidence that, sort of in the public record that folks think something is particularly successful. It does begin to get very subjective.
Emily, if I may.
Please, of course.
Hey, Melissa, thank you. I appreciate that. And we need like ongoing honest assessments of what can be done while we figure this out. Can I suggest that maybe this be the part of a potential second level or second stage of research, or something that perhaps the subcommittee does for itself when we find schemes or plans that we feel might be applicable to Oregon and want to start fleshing out like those individual ones, that we then start kind of delving into, well, how did it really play out in another state, and what do we think that means for translating it to Oregon?
I mean, that seems to make a lot of sense to me, although I'm intrigued by what Melissa just said about legislative history. I wonder if, like, I wonder how much more of a burden that would add to look at that. 'Cause I'm trying to think, like, what does legislative history show us? I mean, it shows us, fixing things, or it shows us changes in how people think things should be done. So I'm trying to just guess here, like how much work that would be, whether it would really reveal anything important. It seems like perhaps limited and constrained enough to be part of a non-subjective, fact-finding research request. But I'm not real sure whether it would be worth the time. It seems like something, I don't know, people who've watched legislative changes a lot. What do you think? Melissa, you brought it up. What would you like, what's your way in on how much work it would be versus like the chance of that being something revealing?
It could be a lot of work. I mean, if you really dive into a legislative record, and I'm not that familiar with other states, and so I don't know how easy it will be to find those things in every state. And sometimes legislative records are pretty thin. A lot isn't recorded or said or captured as to why people are either for or against a certain change. So I don't know, it would be really, we might find some things, but I wouldn't want us to spend a lot of time on that and feel like we would need to capture something for every state on this element.
Okay. So our goal today is to agree as a quorum to what this letter is going to say. So I'm going to suggest we strike this and save it for, as Todd suggested, a next step. And before I we do a quorum vote on what's outlined here in this list, Melissa, are there other things you would like to bring up? You had some thoughts when you reviewed the first draft letter.
Yes, thank you, Emily. You already addressed one of them, which was, do you want us to catalog what other states define as in the public interest? And you've already added that. Our other clarification are under the estimates and payment section, things like itemized cost breakdowns, estimated before the request is filed or actual after. We just wanted to clarify with all of you that what you're looking for is state laws or rules requiring such things, and what those state laws specifically require, not having us look at every agency in that state to know what the agencies might require sort of secondarily under the state law. Same thing for agency policies and schedules. Are you looking for state laws that require such things and what the state law requires those policies to have, as opposed to looking at individual agencies in a state?
Yeah, thank you for that question, both of those. And I'd like to hear from other members of the committee what they think about that. My sense is that it's too big of an ask to request that you try to assess agencies. So many states have different numbers of agencies, but I think what we're looking for in my thinking right now is what do states require and what do they allow? And if we're looking at, it may turn out that a bucket of state law is agencies can set their own policies if they want. It might be, so those, I think we could, that's my take. Other subcommittee members?
I agree with that sentiment, Emily. I think that we're already asking LPRO to do a lot here, and I think that we need to confine our request to what the statutes say for the states, rather than delving into individual agencies. So I believe that is a completely legitimate concern raised by Ms. Leone, and I would hope that we get that fixed so that this is already going to be a pretty substantial undertaking. I want to make sure that we don't overly burden them with those kind of details. Thank you.
Yeah, anybody else want to weigh in on that from the subcommittee?
I agree.
Okay. Melissa, you mentioned two places, estimates and payments, to look at state laws or rules requiring these things, not individual agency requirements. And can you see my draft on the screen, Melissa?
It's very, very small, but it's that same section. So the fourth bullet under estimates and payment is agency policies or schedules. So just clarifying that for that section, those different elements, you're looking for the state laws.
Okay, it's just one bullet point in the draft, even though it was broken out in two questions. Correct?
Okay, sorry, say that again.
It was just one bullet point in the draft, even though you broke it out into two questions.
Correct. Well, actually, no. It is the first half was to clarify that that those first three bullets we're looking for state laws that would either require or allow the itemized cost breakdowns before or after, and or require advance payment of costs. And then to us, the notion of agency policies was sort of different than the, kind of functional accounting piece of the public records costs.
Okay.
But they're the same thing. That whole section, what you're looking for are the state requirements for such things, not individual agency adopted things.
That's correct.
What's the preamble for this whole list? You got up at the top of the document. It says among states, but how many allow? So you could just say there how many allow, how many prohibit, how many limit, how many require in state law each of the following.
Great. All right. I think we're clear. And then with we can get that. We'll go through it with a grammar comb and make sure it's not repetitive and it is accurate. Anything else that you wanted to add, Melissa?
No, otherwise the rest of it made sense to Leslie and I.
Okay, I just want to say how much I appreciate your willingness to communicate with us before we formally send this request, so that we, we're confident that it will not be a burden on you and make sense when you get it. So with this draft, as we see in front of us, you know, with the caveat that we will go through it. Steve, sorry, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to clarify. There was that one bullet that referred to state agencies and their policies. And, I think that may be something that I wrote on an earlier version, but my thought with that was just to know whether there are states, like how many states require agencies to develop, or agencies or political subdivisions like cities to have policies, to create policies versus establishing it in law. I mean, as opposed to prescribing a policy in law, there are states that say, we don't care what your policy is, but you have to have one.
So does this capture it? State laws or rules requiring or permitting agencies or, what'd you say, political subdivisions?
Oh yeah, agencies or public bodies.
Yeah, okay.
To enact policies.
There we go. We needed a verb in there. Okay, so it's requiring or permitting. That captures what the difference is, right?
Yeah. That's it.
Okay. Do people feel comfortable like approving this letter with a final like grammar check and clarification if necessary now, or do you want to look at it in, you know, writing in your email again and approve it? Okay. So
I would move that we adopt the draft letter if you're ready for that, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that would be crossing off this number 3, and it would be as you see it here. I will back out the. I'm sorry, it's so tiny. I just tried to make it larger, but also, you know, here what I'm going to do. I know this is probably more than I need to, but where the heck's the chat in this thing? I'm just going to put the link to this in the chat. So if anybody wants to make sure they can read it right now, you can look at it. But I'm hearing a motion from Mark. Do I hear a second?
Second from Michael.
Okay, all in favor of approving this letter and then doing a once over for grammar and sharing it with Senator Thatcher with the request that she share it on with LPRO, please say aye.
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 Okay, great. So moved and done. Fabulous. Thank you all very much. Oh gosh, I totally forgot to ask for public comment on it. I'm sorry. Was there anybody who's here from the public who wanted to make any comments specifically about the LPRO request? Okay, I see no hands. I hear no voices. Let's move on. Sorry about that, really. Okay, so we are now moving to the part of the meeting where we will take public testimony about the cost of records requests. And we don't need a quorum for this. We have no other business today that we would need a quorum for. This meeting is being recorded, so any subcommittee member who's not here will, of course, be able to review any testimony that they're unable to stay for. But can people who are here who would like to offer public testimony raise your hand digitally, please?
Hey, Emily, I'm sorry, this is Mark Landauer. Could you remove your the screen, or do you want to keep the document up during the public testimony so that people can perhaps refer to it? It makes no difference to me.
No, we're done with that section. Thanks. I totally forgot I was sharing. Is it gone now?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks for the reminder. Okay, great. Appreciate it. Okay. I see 2 hands who are up who'd like to testify. One is from Rick and one is from Jacob Wiley. So thank you both for making the time today to speak. And we have, you know, quite a lot of time. So I'd like to ask you, though, to each of you, if you could limit your remarks to 5 minutes. Rick, I think you had your hand up first, so welcome, and would you please identify yourself fully and go
Yeah,
ahead.
my name's Rick Gardner. I have over 40 years experience in a number of states dealing with public records purely as a member of the public. I'm actually named on a Supreme Court case in the state of Washington over public records when I lived there. You ask around the agencies around the state and you'll find I'm pretty well known. In fact, on the prescription drug monitoring program, I was told that a law was changed by the Democrats in response to a public records request I made. So I have very little patience at this point with bureaucracy around public records. And I have two things I'll say quickly. First of all, I think nothing could be more wrong than saying the media's interest and the public's interest are the same. The media are private businesses now, especially the nonprofits who delude themselves that they represent the public. The notion of the media as the public's witness is gone, okay? Only a few older journalists even remember that, and I'm older. So, you know, that's gone. Now it's solutions journalism, which is basically media deciding their agenda, usually with legislators that they're friendly with, and saying that's the public interest, okay? The COVID event, as I call it, has been the glaring example of that. So that's the first thing. They are completely different. In fact, the only thing I think should be free are when the public makes requests, because the media has lawyers, they have a financial base. It's the public who ends up that they are sticking with fees and everything else as a means of discouraging them. The second thing I want to say is, because we are in a supermajority state, we are watching a perversion of the whole public records process, because they cannot be forced as a supermajority to listen to either the other minority or the public. I'm a NAV. I am nonpartisan, but I used to be a Democrat, and I left the Democratic Party in part over the hypocrisy around public records. So I'm going to give you 3 examples quickly that nobody discussed. The first is that a lot of municipalities and stuff, if you put in a public records request, and Oregon seems to have become unique in this in the last 10 years or so, partially with automation, they tell you they are authorized to charge search costs to even tell you if they have responsive records. They cite an opinion from the DOJ, which is disingenuous in itself. It cites a case, actually, as its whole basis possibly, is somebody who is asking for records from the motor vehicle department because their costs are solely sustained by the highway tax at the time this was written. Has nothing to do with any other jurisdictions, but the DOJ cynically hides behind that as their entire advice to municipalities and other things about why they could charge and everything else. So basically, any individual, I put in for a simple public records request for my local community. I was told it probably cost $200 or $300. I went through a long thing with them explaining I'm not new to this game. I cited the laws and everything else. And they basically said, please leave us alone. You know, that's where we're at. And this is a very blue place that I'm in. Again, I'm a NAV, but I'm tired of being lied to and I'm tired of hypocrisy. The second thing is you get these successive requests to narrow before they'll even answer anything. So a major state entity, I put in a public records request where the first item was any public records that document or state the sources of the content of this form. And it was related to a current online form that's germane to the current COVID event. They wrote back and said, we don't know what you mean. What documents do you mean as a public record? I said, any public record. They defined what a public record is, okay? And I know they're playing games because I've had several interactions with this state agency and its other parallels or this state entity in the last 3 or 4 years. But the last one is the most horrendous of all. And I actually think your committee is probably going to be kind of useless. The OHA is the only agency that I know of that has a fairly responsible system for public records, even if the management of the OHA and their close ties to the Democratic supermajority make sure that there's very little that system could actually do. The one key thing they say is if a public record has been released to anybody, including the media, okay, that then by definition is a public record anybody can get at no cost. There was a recent case where two media outlets, to their credit, requested records from the state's state police and the state medical examiner about deaths during the June heat wave. And the DOJ, for purely political reasons, and because I know the rest of the story and everything, said, oh, we think that these media outlets, yeah, we should waive 432.350, which actually exempts vital records from public disclosure, to give them just these, just these records, because we kind of know we're going to get favorable press out of that. That's why I was saying the media and the public are not on the same page. I put in a public records request for exactly the records that were released, and even pointed out under the statutes that when they released those records, which were not the full vital records, but abstracted them, that was them creating a new public record. Okay, and so once that was created, that then, was defined by Rosenblum's shop to be a public record. And they went around with me for about 2 months saying, well, we're not sure, it's going to cost you money. We could do a search. I don't think the people telling me that, I think they were just telling what their management told them to tell. Okay, I think they were doing their best. And I found this generally, that the public records officers in each of these agencies are almost apologetic by the time I get done talking to them about public records and the public interest, and kind of admit, in fact, another state entity, it became pretty clear their lawyers got involved. In fact, an elected official told me it looks like their lawyers got involved. But they, in the end, they basically discouraged me from getting what was already a released public record. I don't, you want to talk about cost, get somebody on something that has actual experience filing for a lot of public records in the public interest. The public records I file for never have anything to do at all with me personally. They have to do with what the media is not covering, which is why I say they're not the same. What the media is not covering, other cases what the media is misrepresenting, but with me and other people care about, say, well, we'll go get the records straight from the horse's mouth. And every obstacle is thrown up that all comes down to cost. Any way they can tell you, oh, it's going to cost to do a search. It's going to cost to tell you. Now, years ago in Washington, this is where I'll end.
Sorry, can I just, you have, this is very helpful testimony. Thank you very much. It's been 5 minutes. Can I ask you a question and see if there's other subcommittee members who have questions for you?
Yep.
My question for you is what you see as, what you see as legal fixes to these problems you cited.
Two things to start. The first thing is they need by law to prescribe that every entity that's covered by the public records laws, they can try to exclude some if they want, the Democrats, must keep their public records in a form. So their first answer is, oh, it's going to cost us all this kind of money to dig it up. They're all on computer. Okay. So they must, number one, keep their records in a form that they can't use the excuse it's going to cost us all this time and money to dig it up. That's the first thing. And there's no reason in this age of computerization to even give that excuse, but they're getting that nod from the DOJ. Okay. The second thing is that they should do, I don't think Washington even does it anymore, but there was a golden period in Washington in the late 90s and early 2000s where the search was free. The response to your request was, we either have responsive records or not. Here's a list of them. These we claim an exemption for. And now we'll talk about cost of production, or if we claim it's exempt, you want to go. So those are the two things. You do that. And the third thing, of course, is if they produce the public record for somebody else, it's available to everybody. So the next guy doesn't have to go through it all again. Mm-hmm. Those are the three things.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else? Thank you very much for coming to testify. If you would like to submit a written testimony, Rick, that goes into specific detail of some of the examples that you've shared, that written testimony is welcome. Anybody else on the subcommittee have any questions for Mr. Hancock? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I did want to limit it to 5 minutes just in equity. Yeah, thank you for coming today. And then Jacob Wiley, is that the correct
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt you? I'm sorry. This is Michael Crone. I actually have to run to another meeting, but thank you for everything, and I appreciate everyone's time. Bye.
Yeah, great. Thanks. You can catch the last testimony from the video later. Thank you very much, Michael.
Sounds good.
Jacob Wiley, or if I pronounced your last name correctly?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, please. If you wouldn't mind, you up to 5 minutes, please.
Sure. First, I just wanted to say that I'm speaking as myself as a citizen of Oregon and not representing my employer in any way. My main concern with the question of fees related to public records requests centers on some of the larger requests that sometimes are made by larger corporations that use that information for profit in their own websites or in other ways. By reducing the fees or putting limits on them, some of these really substantially large requests that, in a small agency with a few people can take, an entire 40 hours of staff time to respond to from multiple different departments. One of the ways that you can offset that is through those fees. And if they're reduced or eliminated entirely for certain groups, then there's a danger there that other critical services would suffer, especially in combination with the timelines under Oregon's law. If you're forced to respond within a certain limited time, unless you meet one of the limited exceptions, then you're diverting a lot of resources from the local governments to doing or public record request. And that could also include media requests as well. If they were free, it could divert a lot of resources onto a certain thing to meet a statutory deadline. And of course, sometimes that wouldn't even be possible. And we have those exceptions laid out. But at that point, the exception would be the rule. So inadequate staff time would become universal. Those are just my comments. Again, that's just as myself, not representing my employer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Wiley. I have a couple questions I'd like to ask you, but anybody else from the subcommittee have any questions for Jacob Wiley?
I do.
Yeah.
Hi. So I know you said that you don't represent your employer, but it sounds like you do work for a public body. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yes,
I.
Right, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, so I was just going to ask what level of, you mentioned media requests having the potential for overwhelming you if the costs were waived. What level of media requests do you receive now?
Typically, those would just be a local government or local newspapers and regional, maybe at the county or maybe regional level. And oftentimes those requests, they relate to large volumes of emails or something. So the request will be something broad like all emails related to XYZ. And our system, the way we have it now, requires manually going through, potentially thousands of emails to make sure that there's nothing incidentally, with an attorney involved or something that or it's not even related to the request in any way, which is probably more the case than anything else. There's just tons of emails to go through and determine whether they're relevant or not.
Mm-hmm. Of course, you know that the law does not require you or prohibit you from disclosing irrelevant emails.
Right. Yeah, but generally you don't want to just, it's also a logistics issue of, sending somebody such a large volume of data. You kind of want to cut it down before you send it.
Yes. How many of those like high volume requests you get in a year?
I would probably say it's a handful, but the way our policy works here, if it takes less than half an hour, it's free anyway. I would say that 95% of our public records requests are free. We provide the records for free anyway, because it doesn't even reach the level at which we charge. So the 5% that we do charge for are these larger requests that would take a large amount of staff time. Often what happens is that we will produce the invoice and ask them to pay for their search. They'll respond with, hey, can we do something to get the cost below half an hour? And we generally come to a conclusion that we can figure out a way to do that. So it is a good negotiation tool, not necessarily a way that we generate money. We end up probably releasing them for free anyway. The danger I see in making them completely free is that we would lose that negotiation tool, and they could just stick their heels in and say, we want all of these all of this done no matter what, no negotiation.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes
That's
sense.
just my thought.
So this may be difficult to answer, but I mean, if you had to guess on like the initial cost estimates prior to negotiation, can you guess sort of net? What are we talking about? $10,000, $100,000 in a year?
I think the largest one I've ever seen is 600.
$600.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're saying you're saying prior to the negotiation, like you say, this is going to cost you $600, and then they're able to get it down to less than half an hour.
Yeah. And then it's produced for free.
Right. So if we took away this tool, then you might have to
spend 80 hours on a request.
Okay. Is part of your concern that there would be more records requests from the news media if
it's possible
they didn't have to pay?
I think it's possible, but I tend to think the requests relate more to the topic and less to the fear of costs. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the cost up front is stopping anyone from sending them at the moment, if that makes sense. So I don't know that there would be a change in how many requests are made.
Okay. But again, just so I'm clear, the hit to your government, if you didn't have this tool of imposing fees on news media requesters, would be, in your experience, about $600 a year.
That's the largest request individually. Well, and let's say too that we never actually saw the $600. So I'm not saying we're taking a hit. Oh, I see what you mean. Is that if we did respond, we would have no spending $600. Yes, that's. I don't know off the top of my head how much the total would be, but I would expect it to be in the thousands if we were to actually complete the requests. And of course, there might be the request could be larger if there wasn't that fee associated with it as well. As sometimes we'll even negotiate before we even make the invoice. So.
And roughly speaking, how big is your government's budget?
We're in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay.
But that's not the budget for the public records requests. It's not. I'll say that.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Please.
If I could, just a quick question, Jacob. Thank you very much for taking the time to appear before the subcommittee today. I didn't catch this. Needless to say, you're very familiar with processing public records requests, and your testimony is very valuable, and I would encourage you and your colleagues to continue to be engaged in this, because your comments are very valid and pertinent to obviously the topic that we're working on. My question to you, though, is quite simply, and I didn't catch this, are you a member of a state or local government?
I'm the city recorder for the city of Oregon City.
Thank you very much, Jacob.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I wanted to ask, anybody else from the subcommittee have questions for Mr. Wiley?
I did want to mention again that I'm not representing the city in these comments. These are my own.
Understood.
Yeah, absolutely understood. Yeah. We do appreciate your experience and the expertise that derives from that. My question to you, can you give an example or two of the corporate type requests that you mentioned?
Some of them include requests for unrecovered funds, bonds. So there's these companies that apparently list unrecovered money, and you're able to search for your name and locate funds. And I assume they take a portion of that as a finder's fee or something. Those are one of those that take a large amount of time because the unrecovered funds can be located in several different systems, and our finance department obviously has other priorities, and it can be really hard to hunt down all that money in different little hidden pockets here and there. It could be in different departments. So that's the one that comes to mind. There's also others that relate to vendors and public contracts, just large volume lists of anything that has to do with something, and they take a long time. We figured out a report that's easy to run that satisfies them, but it's usually not exactly what they ask for, but it seems to be something that they're happy with.
Yeah.
So
that's great. Thank you. And then for that answer. And then the other thing, just building on that, I wanted to ask you about was kind of anticipated that. So you just kind of clarify what you just said. You received a request. You figured out a report to run. I'm interested in your experience in trying to design systems ahead of time, or when you've upgraded systems, like how much attention has been paid to how will this help us on the other end provide records to the public?
I would say I have rather limited experience in that kind of thing. I've only been doing this for a few years now, or actually about a year. But so I haven't had the opportunity to design any system. I would say that we're members of the Oregon Records Management Solution, or MS, through the state. That has a feature in it for searching within documents. And we use that kind of as our final repository for documents, archiving, and that can be useful in that way. But that wasn't the intent, to use it specifically for searching for public records. It was mainly because it was a good system for archiving.
Oh, interesting. So that's it. Using the archives that are provided through that system are searchable in a way you find useful when you need to release public records that would go back to whatever dates you've archived.
If it was that kind of a request where it was like any document related to something, that would be a quick way of finding anything that's related to X.
Okay.
But usually requests are not like that. They'll be like a building permit and for a certain address. And so that doesn't really help because we have it someplace else stored in a different system. So
right, got it. Yeah, we heard testimony last month about from a journalist about the city of Salem and how they have all their permits in a searchable public database. So they have now avoided all those requests. It doesn't require any labor to respond to any of those particular requests. Could you just, so what is the system you mentioned again? ORMS? What was that?
The Oregon Records Management Solution, or it's a collection of agencies across the state. I think the state itself is using it, and local governments can sign on to it as well. It's a DoD certified archive system, and we contract with them to do that. So we participate in this large electronics record management system.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other subcommittee members have questions for Jacob Wiley? No. Okay. Thank you. Thanks again. Thanks. And just I'm going to encourage both of you who we've heard from today, as a member of the public and as a member of the public representing himself, but working within as a records provider and custodian. We'd love to hear from your colleagues. So please spread the word that we are, looking for as much experience and testimony as we can gather in the next several months. And we'll have, other open meetings as well as taking written testimony anytime. Is there anybody else from the public who would like to speak today? Could you raise your hand digitally? Nick Budnick. Yes. Hi.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Thanks for making this opportunity happen for the public to speak. I just wanted to share with you a few experiences I've had as a reporter. I am, as I think many of you know, a volunteer for the Society of Professional Journalists Freedom of Information Committee, but I just am here to share my experience over time. What these anecdotes are offered are not to talk about what a terrible time I've had, but to talk about the situations that members of the public face, which I think reporters typically are able to deal with, but members of the public may not be able to. I've had Portland Community College try to charge me to look at audit work papers that are typically released for free by other agencies in a short amount of time. They wanted to charge me for legal review of $300 an hour to review every page before releasing, simply because they touched upon, as far as I could tell, a sensitive subject for them. I guess the point is, for me, the lesson of that and some of these other examples is that when a lot of government officials are very conscientious, as Jacob and many of the other gatekeepers out there are very conscientious and fulfill the spirit of the law. But when agencies want to abuse the law, to charge onerous fees, to discourage public scrutiny, they have full discretion to do so under the law. The problem that this creates is that to appeal takes time, and most people don't have the time. And the law gives only limited leeway, as far as I can tell, for district attorneys to really weigh in, and they don't necessarily have the comfort levels outside of Multnomah County to address these situations, in my experience. Other examples, I've had the Secretary of State charge me or try to charge me hundreds of dollars to look at calendars of high-level public officials, because the manner in which they kept them, the program that they had gotten, would require them to review every page individually and would take them time. This is for a single public official. I've had DHS offer me a cost estimate of hundreds of dollars to look at a log of public records requests, which are by definition, public, a mere log of who's asking for what. I've had, in my experience, requesting records from State Department of Administrative Services and the City of Portland, records that used to be provided for free in a very short amount of time, now take weeks and involve at least initial cost estimates running in the hundreds of dollars. And this is for a simple Excel spreadsheet. And it's things are going in the wrong direction in many of these instances. I've had records, gatekeepers at the City of Portland and DAS try to charge me for extra time that they want to take to double check that their data is accurate before they release it, which is not permissible under the law. And these numbers can add up quickly. I've had the City of Portland tell me that they could not locate a tort claim notice, but they would be willing to find it if I would pay extra money for them to take the extra time to find this misplaced document that was, in any event, you get my point. My point is they're charging the public for things that should not be happening because they're not operating by best practices. And that the fact that they're actually sharing these cost estimates with members of the public shows that they are not trained in the law, which is unfortunate. There is just a huge lack of training, and it would be wonderful if there was some sort of fix to assist with that. In addition to lack of training, the problem I think is that, as Rachel Alexander I think mentioned to you earlier, agencies have no skin in the game because they, in theory, are able to charge full cost to the public. There's no incentive on them, incentive for them to do things efficiently, and they have full leeway to throw up obstacles for those limited times when certain officials may want to do so, even while many, of course, don't do that, and many times they're just operating under the guidance that they have received. So I apologize, I jumped around a bit. Any questions?
Thank you, Nick, very much. Any questions from members of the subcommittee?
This is Mark Landauer. Nick, would you agree that, well, you've given us a list or a rendition of some of the bad actors and some of the charges that have been proposed for you to pay in order to receive documents. Have you had any good experiences with public bodies producing public records?
Mark, thanks a lot. And let me just be clear, I was not describing bad actors at all. I was just giving you anecdotes of how the law operates today in ways that are not necessarily in keeping with what I think is the intent of the law. So I apologize if I gave that impression. As I tried to say, like in much of the time, I'm dealing with gatekeepers that mean well, that are, in fact, most of the time, I'm dealing with gatekeepers who mean well. And I've had a lot of good experiences, and I think it would be, I mean, there are people that are doing this well. So I encourage the PRAC to keep working on these issues and best practices.
Could I have a follow-up, please?
Of course.
So, Nick, you've dealt with, obviously, the state, cities, community colleges. I assume you've dealt with school districts. I'm sure you have dealt with an occasional special district out there. And you're making, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. I don't want to suggest that you're pointing fingers or anything, but you said that there's a large lack of education out there. In your experience, are there certain sectors of local government that you feel need education? I mean, are you running into more problems, let's just say, with school districts or with cities or special districts, or is this problem pretty universal throughout?
I guess I was not talking about lack of education, but I think there's a need for training, and I think it mostly is at the local level. I think state agencies have made a lot of strides, although not all of them are necessarily, not all the individuals I deal with are fully up to speed. So that's a general statement. And I'm not saying there's a lack of education at the agencies. I'm saying that individual people come on and they may not be trained. I had an excellent PIO at one local sheriff's office who I said, hey, I'd like to get a certain set of emails, and he never came. He just said, here you go, and that'll be $600. And I was like, whoa, first of all, I never, there was no dialogue of how do we narrow this? Because I don't want to be a burden. I want to be as surgical as I possibly can. I want to work in collaboration and partnership. But a lot of times people don't have the training or the authorization to reach out and engage with the requester and say, hey, you know what? How can we make this easier for everybody?
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions from the subcommittee for Nick? Todd?
Hey, Nick.
Hey, Todd.
I'm curious, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the authorization piece you mentioned, because it's definitely one area where I see the biggest trouble, because I do often also encounter like frontline staff who are either eager to do the work and get the records out or don't know what their obligations are, but either way are kind of hamstrung by, you know, lack of money, lack of staff, lack of technology, and of course they're not responsible for budgeting. It's leadership that provides them with the money, as well as sort of like the cultural leadership to say, yeah, this is a priority, this isn't an afterthought or an add-on. So what kind of messaging do you recommend the PRAC as a whole or the subcommittee consider focusing on to get out to leadership when we're drafting these proposals to sort of accompany whatever legislative concept we're floating or new ideas that we're trying to put forth? Just from your perspective, given that you've been doing this for so long and interacted with so many different types of governments, you know, what do you think they want to or should be hearing from us to help understand what we're doing, or to change their minds, or just sort of get them on board here?
Well, you know, and Mark has heard all this and knows all this, but you've got to make people feel. I think there's a lot of inefficiency in how the law is implemented right now on a day-to-day level, and I feel like creating authorization and clear guidance for public servants to engage with requesters to narrow requests using the carrot of fee waivers would lead to, you know, a lot of time savings and potentially cost savings for government. Because as we all know, every time, you know, you, Todd, or you, Mark, are interrupted in the middle of something else, a big project you're working on, you may be able to get compensated for that time, but is it necessarily going to allow you to be efficient? I didn't necessarily say that well, but I guess my point is doing something like what the Ledge Counsel's office does, which is, okay, if it's a public interest, we'll take 40% off the top. And Mark, you've heard this before. And if you're willing to narrow it, I'll give you up to 100% fee waiver. It saves the Ledge Counsel time and money to do it that way. And they're confident enough in the law that they are happy to do that. I think most public servants don't know they can do that. And I know SPJ has sought to address this legislatively, but I'll spare you that. The other thing that I want to say before I run out of time, and I have to say I have to leave in about 2 minutes. I apologize. The other problem with these, the costs and the need to file a fee waiver request is that tolls the timeline on providing information. So the other effect of being able to charge onerous fees or it creates potentially huge delays, which interfere with the public accessing information in a timely manner. So I don't know how you solve that issue, but I just wanted to raise that as another aspect of this. But there have been instances where people can use these cost estimates to slow down the release of public information. And there are some agencies that frankly appear to, in the past, in years past, that have appeared to use a tactic of delay to keep information from getting to the public. And I don't think it's widespread at all, and I haven't run into this recently. So let me just be clear to you, Mark, about that. Most of the people I deal with are operating in good faith.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Nick, it sounds like you have to go, but thank you so much for testifying.
Thank you all very much for your efforts. Take care.
Is there anyone else who is here who would like to offer testimony today? Please raise your hand digitally or unmute and say so. Oh, I see a digital hand. Did it, but now it disappeared. Was it a Jacob? Jacob? Oh, Amy
We have
Johnson.
Amy Johnson.
Yeah. And sorry, it's going on and off in the list. Thank you. Amy? Welcome.
Yes, hi. I had actually one question before I provided a little statement. So will this council be reaching out to individual cities in Oregon, the same as what you're going to be doing to other states? I mean, are you going to be giving cities the opportunity to chime in on this whole process, because it will ultimately affect them if there's any change to what cities can charge for public records requests? So I think that would be really important to give them an opportunity to, chime in on the whole topic. And I guess I'm just kind of listening to the other testimony, which was wonderful. We can't always process public records requests in the same way. It's, some are very voluminous, the amount of materials that, we need to gather for certain requests, and it does take time. We don't have a perfect way to access, like, let's say if it's for emails for a certain topic or what have you. Even our IT team, there's no one way, even if you put in the search parameters to pull or call the information into one perfect, tidy return. So you sometimes have to sort through thousands of emails to get to, really the heart of the matter of the request. And that takes also, then you have to go through and you're looking for personal information that may need to be redacted. It's not just something that can be, here you go. I mean, often it is, but for some larger requests, it's very time consuming. And those are hours taken away from staff that they would, ordinarily be doing other things. So for compensation for those types of things is absolutely, and this is my personal opinion, I don't want to speak on behalf of the city of Salem. Sorry, I'm the deputy city recorder. But yeah, it would really be problematic, I think, for folks to get their other duties done when, they're stuck. And I've been kind of in that position where public records requests, several actually came in. There were thousands of emails to pour through, review, and it took just hours upon hours. One I think was over, I don't know how many hours, but it was a lot. It was the better part of a week. So yeah, they're not all perfect again. And we try to get, those requests out as soon as we can, and as efficiently as we can, but that's not always the case. It's just some are a little more sticky than others in trying to ascertain what it is they're requesting and to try to pull everything together to satisfy the request. And so there's a lot of components to it that, often that just take up a lot more time, and folks don't understand that. And we are a city that we really make a lot of effort to ask folks to narrow the scope of their requests, because we think it really helps. It helps the requester, it helps the city, it helps everybody. It helps, reduce the scope, the cost, the time involved, etc. So anyway, I just wanted to put my 2 cents in right now, and probably will do so more at a later time. But thank you.
Amy, thank you. I want to let Todd, or anybody from the subcommittee, of course, weigh in, but Todd, because I saw you nodding earlier because you're working on pulling together a local government panel. A couple things I just wanted to mention, Amy. First, just to reiterate the process we're going through, we're gathering testimony. We will hopefully, our plan is to propose some legislation. So we won't actually be making any legal decisions. We don't have the authority to do that. So we're trying to, but we very much appreciate your input and everyone's input that we've gotten, and we'll get in the future, because we are hoping to work through issues of concern ahead of time, so that when we do in fact have some legislation, it is something that a lot of people stakeholders will see as solving some of the challenges that all parties in who work with public records have been facing around costs in Oregon. So that's just for to reiterate this sort of the scope of what we are doing. And I had a question for you before opening it up to the rest of the subcommittee. So I'm curious, in your office, do you have any percentage of FTE whose main responsibility is to respond to public requests for records? That is their dedicated job is to fulfill that, required by law, public service of providing records to be a transparent government. Do you have any FTE at all dedicated to that specifically?
I don't. Okay, I don't believe so. I do know, though, for our police department, they have a dedicated team of police records techs that they get between 10 and 15,000 public records requests a year. And so they have a whole team. Now, I don't know what their FTE is, but I mean, we could certainly probably check into that information, because we have a whole slew of designated records managers that handle the public records requests, and from each department or division. So, we could check with them, or maybe do some statistics to see how much time they're spending.
Well, that might be something we might circle back to ask you or other city folks for. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please go on. I'm sorry.
No problem. I mean, I was just going to say that there's, some departments obviously handle a lot more requests than others. So our building and safety, those are common requests. PD, obviously the largest one that gets the bulk of the quantity of requests, and then it really fluctuates, but yeah, that's something that may be able, maybe a rough estimate we could come up with, but offhand I don't believe I have an exact FTE for any of those at all.
Okay, thank you. And anybody else from the subcommittee would like to ask Ms. Johnson any questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention to Ms. Johnson, first of all, thank you for taking the time to join us today. And secondly, I do believe that we are planning on having a group of city recorders address the subcommittee at a future time. I very much appreciate you chiming in. I just make one quick little statement. Salem is lucky in a lot of respects because it's a large government body. It can afford to have IT techs on their staff at all times. There are literally hundreds of local governments. I'm just reminding folks, hundreds of local governments that don't have IT staff. Okay. They also may not have on-staff attorneys. They have to contract out. I think I made this statement previously at one time. All local governments aren't necessarily equal, if you will, in their capacities or their abilities. And I just wanted to remind everybody of that. Thank you again, Ms. Johnson. And I know that we'll be hearing more from city folks, and I'm actually looking forward to both the city and the counties getting their members on the PRAC confirmed and reappointed to the full committee, because I feel a little naked and exposed. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
That being from the local government sector.
Anybody else on the subcommittee want to ask Amy Johnson any questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Thanks again for taking the time to testify. Other members of the public, we have about 42 minutes left in our scheduled, 22 minutes left in our scheduled meeting time. So starting to run out of time, but are there other folks who are here who've come to offer their experience or insight, advice, concerns, questions, etc.? Any members of the public who want to testify? If you can raise your digital hand or turn on your mic and say something, then I would know. I don't hear anyone, and I didn't see any hands go up. I'm seeing a mic go on and off, but not any voices. So if no one else is here to testify, oh, Rick, yes, circling back to you who testified earlier.
Yeah, I just want to point out something that I think is critical. Used to be public records laws were so that the public could inspect, because everything was paper or nobody had a terminal at home, could just inspect public records. So the costs were for reproduction of those records if somebody wanted a copy. That's gotten completely turned around as the cost of reproduction has gone to zero for electronic records, and therefore everybody would think public records would, be almost free. To now, somebody's got the bright idea that they should be reimbursed for their cost of making records accessible, because that's what a search does. It makes them accessible, because public isn't. I think that fundamental flip is actually the root of the problem, and I don't think it was good. I think in small municipalities it may have been good-hearted, where the cost of IT already strains their budget, but I don't think otherwise it was good-hearted or unintentional. I think it was quite intentional after decades of experience, particularly as particularly Northwest governments became supermajority governments. The bottom line is, I think until we get to those fundamental issues of what's being done and why, I don't think we're going to have a chance of actually really being equitable and saying that the public records are the public's records, have a right to inspect. And I have a solution. The Democrats, since they control everything, including the budget, should just set up a budget for all the local municipalities to say these two costs are recoverable out of this budget. We will make an allocation. Search costs and the cost of producing a written summary. Everything that is between, just like the current public records request, but telling the public that these are their records that are accessible. State government will take on funding that. It can't be in the very tens of millions of dollars, okay? And big corporations and all that, who are always used as the example, that's not who's being hurt by any of this. It's the public who has just given up even asking for public records. So,
thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, anybody else from the public who would like to testify? Okay, as you all know, there will be other opportunities. We do accept written testimony anytime. The written testimony email is publicrecords.prc@oregon.gov. If you get public testimony directly to Todd or to any member of the committee, it will get to the right place as well. But that's the official one, publicrecordsadvocate.prc@oregon.gov. My preference would be to absorb what we've heard today and start our discussions of what's sticking with us at a later time. But I will defer to the wishes of the subcommittee members. Did anybody like to discuss things now, or do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second to adjourn. Okay, then let's take a vote on that. All in favor of adjourning. Our next meeting is in 3 weeks. And do we have anyone who's aiming for that date for a focused panel discussion? Do we know? I don't know. But the next, I'll just the next date we meet is 1, 2, 3, the 28th of this month. Okay, all in favor of adjourning till the 28th, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
I think the ayes have it. Great, thanks everybody very, very much. And especially to all the people who came to offer their testimony today. We just couldn't do this kind of work without you at all. And I'm just very grateful. All right, see everybody later. Thank you.
Have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.